Can we talk about this shit?
Oh, Jesus. That's by some people who think that all archaeologists are wrong.
Maybe you can... I haven't
Is that
heard,
a real one?
No, this is a 3D print.
Okay, good.
I've never heard you talk about this. This is the one thing I cannot get a reasonable explanation for, because these things, from my understanding, and I had my friend Matt came in here and brought like a couple dozen of these things that he purchased, and they're made out of like red granite, and they had them measured in light scanners at an big aerospace company. And they found out that they are completely perfectly symmetrical within the deviation is like within less than the width of a human hair.
Yeah,
and that's measuring like literally in here, the dimension between the opening, the edge here, and then all around the whole thing is like so perfectly symmetrical. It would have had to have been made on like a CNC machine today.
I disagree with them. Sorry.
What part do you disagree with?
I have. Let's see. I'm trying to eventually do a video on this.
Okay.
But it's not my specialty. I am not an Egyptologist,
okay.
But I've been talking with people who study this material from archaeological sites, right?
Okay.
So this is something, it's something that right now I'm focusing on Atlantis, so it might take a year before I do a video on this. But here's some initial thoughts. Okay. Let's just go with initial thoughts. And this is just me having seen a few videos that these people have done. Okay.
So your expertise is not involved in like Egypt or Egyptology?
No, I worked in Abydos when I was an undergrad. So a long time ago, when I was, before I really got into my expertise and stuff like that. At the time, I did a lot of digital mapping. I've done a lot of digital mapping. I've designed large-scale GIS and database systems for projects. And so that's what I was doing at that time before I got into environmental archaeology. And so I was at Abydos, which is, that's one of the major pre-dynastic cemeteries right before the next dynasty that builds the pyramids. Okay. So it's where a lot of these stone vessels come from.
And they also... The consensus is that these things were from 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, and I believe
we'll talk about that.
I believe the lathe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we know that the Egyptians didn't. The earliest we know they had the lathe was 1,300 years BC, 13 BC.
I don't know. I don't know that.
That's what I heard. Maybe we can fact check that, Steve.
I talked briefly with Matt on Twitter, but I think that we do know that they had rotating devices like a ceramic wheel around that time. So
around 5,000 BC?
Yeah. And in the Near East and in that area, I think around that time, even in Egypt, they had the ceramic wheel. So to assume that they would not use something that rotated around to make a stone vessel is a big assumption, if you see what I mean. I don't think any reason to assume that. We also have tomb paintings that show how these are being made with a drill that you rotate around. And so with a flint drill bit and stuff like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Paintings of a drill bit?
Yeah.
Really?
And we have reconstruction. I just saw them in the British Museum.
Ancient Egyptians used used lathes for a variety of reasons.
I'd be careful with the term lathe, though. I'd be careful with the term lathe because that is...
Okay. Egyptians developed a two-person lathe around 1300 BC.
Yeah, and I'd also be careful with Google. I'd go with scholarship.
Of course, right. You gotta be,
especially AI stuff. Yeah. But they certainly, before 1300 BC, there's a tomb painting that I saw a depiction of just now, recently in the British Museum. I was there and I was looking at some of these stone vessels.
How would we search for this if we wanted to find it on YouTube? Or on Google, rather? Like a Egyptian tomb painting of a drill?
Stone vessels, maybe?
Oh, look. Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's something else with a drill, yes. The one on the left is, I think, an example of drilling a stone vase. There's several of them, actually. It's not just one. There's a bunch of different examples of people making stone vases. And in the British Museum, they actually had flint artifacts that were the drill bits themselves, and they reconstructed it on the wood and stuff like that. And so they had a whole section on exactly how these vases were made as the Egyptians themselves described it, if you see what I mean. Now, don't get me wrong. These tomb paintings are later, because at the time that some of these really early ones were made, they weren't painting their tombs. It's just how it was. Right. And so, but later on, they show what they do to make stone vases. And there's a YouTube channel, Scientists Against Myths. It's a few Russian scientists who have reconstructed stone vases.
I watched it. It was terrible.
Well, just because
the recreation they made, it took them years.
Well, okay, because
and they did a terrible fucking job. It was awful.
They had one that measures more accurate than the ones that Uncharted Access
No, they didn't. I watched the video.
Well, they have several videos. You need to find one of their more recent ones where they actually make one where they do the measurements and it's more accurate than the measurements Uncharted Access.
Steve, you got to find it. Because I watched one recently.
I don't know which video it is because they have several videos on this topic. But they definitely have a video where it's more accurate. And just because something takes years, Danny, by people who are trying to figure out how to do it as they go. When there's an industry of people that have passed on over generations how to do something, they know how to do it, right? They have the expertise of having made many of them, so it won't take them years.
Sure.
And remember, these guys are just doing it in their free time. There's a difference between somebody doing it as a job versus doing it in their free time. You need to find on scientists against myths.
Oh, oops. Scientists again.
Steve, see if you can just find it. We'll keep going.
Yeah.
So that's one reason I have an issue with is scientists against myths.
So how were they able to get it so goddamn perfect?
Well, I think it just has to do with the circularity of spinning something. You make a compass and you spin it around, you make a perfect circle. You know
within 1/1000th of an inch variation.
That should do that. Yeah.
With that kind of and how do people
like that's how a compass works?
What tools did they use? Like what kind of drill bits did they use? And what kind of?
I think for these they use flint.
And it was all by hand. There was no pallet.
Yeah, it's something that's spun. And they might have had a pallet. They put it on. I don't really know. That's something we can't tell.
And these handles that were built into it with the tubes that go through, like with the holes that go through.
Now that's actually one of my problems.
Piece.
One of my problems is every single one of these I've seen. This is a replica.
These are a little bit off.
Or something's off. Sometimes you can look inside, and you can see bits where it's not perfect inside, where the drill bit has left an impression. So that tells me you can see
the insides are more imperfect than the outsides.
Yeah, which if you're doing it with a modern machine wouldn't happen. Right? And so one of the things that I would say is I also think that they're measuring this with the wrong technology, these scanning light measurements. They should be using CT scans. That's kind of the standard.
They do. They did that too.
Good.
They did that too, but the aerospace I think it was light scanners or something, that whatever they did was able that was the one that was able to measure the variation and how symmetrical it actually is.
Well, no, that's just about capturing a 3D. You can do that with anything.
And the thickness of the walls and how
CT scan gets that.
And how thick it is on this side versus that side. CT scan should do that even better.
What a CT scan does is it shoots X-rays through it. A series of X-rays.
Right.
That's what computerized tomography, I think, is what it stands for. So it shoots a series of X-rays through something to get fully measured the inside, outside, down to the most precise measurements.
Right.
It is the state of the art for us doing kind of measurements in archaeology at precision levels.
Okay.
That is what I use. I know people that do this with animal bones. I know people that do it with pretty much everything, just to get tiny little anatomical differences to be able to see if a goat was moving up and down a mountain. So
with the naked eye.
Okay, so let's talk about this. So what do you want to ask? You want to ask me something first?
You're saying that they did this out of granite by hand, with the naked eye, no measuring.
Think about it like this, Danny.
Within 1/1000th of an inch.
Well, let me explain why. It's just like a compass. You have a compass.
And that's another question. Why? Why does it have to be so perfect?
Well, it's just the way they're making it that makes it so perfect, is what I'm trying to explain. When you have something that's rotating around, so you have the drill, and then you have the bit that comes out here. That's at a set distance from the center of that. It's the radius of a circle, if you see what I mean. As it spins around, it's just making a perfect circumference. Just like how a compass works. You don't need high tech to do that. It's just the motion of creating it in a circular way that's going to naturally make it reasonably perfect, if you see what I mean. It's not like they're pounding at it. If you're pounding at it to make it, or you're jamming something in there to go tink, 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 like imagine like using like a pick, right? If you're doing that, making something perfect is going to be pretty much impossible.
So is that what the conventional Egyptologists say about these? That they were made on circular
bits, so a drill that's moving around circular
drill bits.
Yeah.
But how did they open it up on the, how did they open it up on the inside?
Well, you put something in and then you attach it. So there's a wooden thing going in, and you attach the drill bit on it so that it circles around. If you're making
wood,
the thing you're spinning is wood, and flint stone is attached to it.
So there's so they put a stone
like this.
And they somehow go like that and hollow out the inside of the granite.
Well, they put the lever. Let's go back to those tomb paintings. They show them best. Let's look at the actual ancient Egyptian evidence of how they tell us they made these.
Okay.
Like let's stick with the evidence, guys.
Yeah.
This is what I say. Go from the known to the unknown.
Sure. I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So it's something exactly like that.
Yeah, I mean, that was the tool in the
how
video.
did they suck so bad at drawing, but they were so good at making...
Oh, they didn't suck at drawing. Remember, these
Come on, compared to this, dude, they can do this, but that's what they're drawing.
Art is not value judgments. So that's the thing that comes down. You're spinning that around. At the bottom of that are these drill bits that are attached that rotate around.
Okay.
Right? Do you see what I mean? So that's a different kind of drill with a bow, and that lets you go back and forth with a bow to make it spin very quickly and effortlessly. So that's a bow drill right there.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
You see what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So that's sort of how these this kind of drilling technology, it's around for thousands of years. This is a really, and not just in Egypt, elsewhere too.
I would have to I would have to see somebody use this and create something like this that's this perfect.
And to answer the question of how can you fit the bit in there, the same thing would be true if you made it on a machine. You still have to figure out how to get the thing in there.
Of course.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's not an issue. We know that whether they made it on a machine or whether they did it by hand, they were able to get a damn drill bit in there that could go around in a circle to get it to work. Right? And so obviously, look, now that takes a long time. That's a lot of effort to do that by hand.
And there's thousands of them.
But it's doable. Yeah, but dude, they have a lot of people who are constructing these over thousands of years, by the way. It wasn't like there's thousands of them constructed in a 10-year span. We're saying there's thousands of them constructed in a several thousand-year span. Do you see what I mean? So I don't know why that's such a huge issue because, look, these pharaohs and wealthy people, they had huge numbers of people that they controlled and could have work.
It's just the perfection is ungodly.
And that's why I think we sometimes, in our world with modern technology, we underestimate our ancestors. You know,
but we can't even do it now. Like were they that much? That's the whole argument for them being more like an advanced civilization making this something.
Or rather, they were smart people with simple technology and effort to make that. Is what they were. They were smart, skilled people who had a tradition of how to do this, and they did it. You know, like these were people like you and me who are as smart as you and me. They just don't have the technology around us that other people created, by the way, that we use in our day-to-day lives. And so, you know, they had their own technology and they knew how to master it. People in the past were fucking smart. They lived in a tough environment and they survived and thrived.
What do you make of the giant saw blade marks in some of those stones that are found around the pyramids? Like there's giant stones with like perfect cuts that look like they were done with circular saws that you can fit a credit card into. And they even measured the depth of it and it's like a circular, the depth gets deeper towards the middle and like it looks just like a circular saw did it.
So look, I mean, some of this is, I find it silly because people say this about the Egyptians, but like the Romans also have those same perfect cuts. The Greeks have those same perfect cuts. We don't assume they couldn't do that stuff. So why is it that we assume the Egyptians couldn't? That's kind of one of my...
I'm saying like what is the, like, yeah, this stuff. Look at that.
Yeah, dude, that's just very careful, slow
Look at the one with
sawing.
the three cuts.
Yeah, they realized they fucked up and they went and did it again.
How the hell did they do that?
Well, so they probably had, you know, a saw blade with copper, but then they use water and sand because the copper is not, it's not dense enough, so it's going to wear down really badly. It's actually the granite sand and other kinds of sand that you put there. And again, Scientists Against Myths and others have done a lot of videos on this that show that you can cut through very precisely and slowly, no doubt, and you are going to use a lot of copper blades because they wear down eventually. But if you use sand and water there, you can saw very, very precisely through stuff, through hard granite. It's just, you know, I mean, people have done it. I know, they look cool.
I mean, it's insane.
That.
It's mind-blowing.
I don't doubt that these people could do it because they were smart and they had time. They had time and expertise is what they had. You know, I mean, people will say the same thing about us in the future. They're going to be like, how the hell did they make these highways? That was so much work. And it's like, well, yeah, it was a lot of work, but we did it. You know, with the technology we had. In the future, they'll have some faster way to do that kind of stuff. And they'll be mind-boggled at the civilization we built. And they'll be like, nah, they probably had our future technology. Right? Because that's what makes sense to them because they see that all around. This doesn't make sense to us because we don't live back then. You know?
Totally. No, it definitely doesn't make sense to us. It just seems like even so in Christopher Dunn's book, he interviewed a guy who runs a granite quarry, a guy who has a huge company that produces granite. They make countertops, they make all kinds of crazy stuff out of granite. And he basically said to him, he goes, he was showing him some of like the big granite blocks that exist like in the Serapeum, the big granite boxes. And he was asking him like, if you were to recreate this, A, how would you do it? B, how much would it cost? And he first said, just the freight alone would be like $250,000 to move this thing. And it would be so much more expensive.
Which is, by the way, why we don't redo this stuff. Because we can't. Meaning, we don't have the money to employ thousands and thousands of people for years to build a pyramid. Who's going to fund that? You know what I mean? Like, because if you want to do that, you have to employ... Look, everything in our world, the most expensive thing is human labor. Let's be honest. If you're doing something in America, the most expensive thing is human fucking labor and skilled human labor, right? And so if you're going to build a pyramid, you need to be able to employ thousands of people over years to build it. So how are we going to do that if we don't get Elon Musk or someone like that or Bill Gates to actually employ thousands of people to reconstruct a fucking pyramid? So if you're going to say, I've never seen someone build a pyramid. Well, fuck you. Like, seriously, how are we logically going to do that in our world today? Because we'd have to pay all those people. So, like, of course nobody's done it because we'd have to get those skills and teach the people these kind of traditional stonemason crafts. And then get enough people to do that. Get them all together and spend 10 years of their lives doing it. And, like, we don't have the resources to do that. We have some guys, some scientists in Russia who are willing to invest a couple years into making a stone vase in their free time to show that it can be done.
Yeah, but they failed.
No, they did not.
The one I saw, they failed. Steve, you got to find the consensus.
They have one from a few months ago where they measured it and it's more precise, is what they said. They compared it to one of the... we need to find the video. Look for Scientists Against Myths, stone vase, more precise maybe. I mean, it doesn't look too bad to me.
Look at all the flat... No, it looks terrible. I mean, the one on the right is like...
They said that they used the same exact measurements, and so can we go on to my second critique of these people, Uncharted X and Matt Bial?
Well, first of all, we got to find out like what is the actual consensus of what they finished. Like, can we find something? Go on Reddit, go on somewhere.
So some of the reasons why that exterior surface looks less perfect is because they didn't do the last step, which would be to polish it.
Polishing.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's just how do you make the stone vase? The last step would be let's polish it smooth.
I want to see a write up somewhere, like find on Google or on Reddit or on Twitter somebody who did like an unbiased, basically analysis of the video and compare it to like some of the things that Ben, the vases that Ben talks about.
I know David Miano has a long video that critiques the stone vases.
No, but he's biased. We got to find somebody
who's not biased. Come on.
We got to find somebody.
The world, everybody is biased.
We got to find somebody who doesn't have a YouTube channel that's dedicated to one side. Like you have people like Ben who makes the stuff that shows the evidence for it, and you have people like David who everything on their YouTube channel is based on debunking. You're going to have to do it if
you claim you're not biased.
Right, no, I don't
I don't know if you are not biased, though. I think we're all biased.
I think I am biased. I don't think that. I have not seen any evidence, and you're not convincing me that this stuff was done by hand.
So second critique. I have 3 critiques, and the last one's the most important, by the way. Second critique. Okay. Whenever I've seen one of these videos, and I'm not going to lie, I've not seen all their videos. I'm not ready to make my video on this.
Right.
Okay, so this is my impression. I could be wrong, but I've seen a few videos. I've seen a few critique videos. I've seen some sort of sample of both sides, let's say. And I am not an Egyptologist, so I don't have a horse in that race, let's say. But I am a scholar, and I think that in general my colleagues are more correct than not. So that is my bias, let's say. Every time I've seen measurements on a stone vase, they're always different measurements from vase to vase. Sometimes it's the angle of the lip. Sometimes it's the circumference. Sometimes it's this. Sometimes it's that.
Yes.
I've also never seen 2 stone vases that are exactly the same.
Again, yeah, and let me say, even when he brought in all his vases, he made it very clear that not all of them were perfect. A lot of them are very imperfect.
And so to me, that's what I would call a red flag. Where if you have something where you're trying to argue that this is machine made, and maybe, look, machines usually make the same thing, over and over again. That's what factories do, for example, right? They make you have a blueprint, you have a design, and you make it there. And what you don't have is, because you make your blueprint perfect, you don't have other imperfections in there. Everything is perfect when you make it with a machine. And so when you can look at the The handles being wonky,
Yep.
that doesn't make sense to me if it's machine made.
Well, maybe
when you look at the
maybe
fact
the
that,
handles didn't matter.
well, but why would they just, if they're making everything perfect, why would you not make the handles perfect?
It's a good question.
I mean, I just don't get that.
Right.
And at the same time, why would you have some dimensions perfect in one vase, but in a different vase, it's different dimensions that are perfect?
But why were these things so perfect, so precise?
But I'm saying they're not, is what I'm trying to explain.
a lot of them are.
No, they're not. They're not all perfect in the same way. If they're all perfect, they'd be perfect in the same way.
This thing is they don't all look the same, right? There's different ones that are different shapes, different sizes, but the ones which a vast majority of them are perfect, the ones that are perfectly symmetrical from side to side, going from the top to the bottom.
I don't know. I've seen videos where they don't even talk about the symmetry and they talk
This
about
guy brought in the scans. Matt Bell brought in the scans. He showed them
I've
to
not
me.
seen them all. Now let's get to the third
So
one.
wait, hold on. Why is it that these are apparently from earlier than the ones that are older and imperfect and look like they're in the museums in Egypt and they came from later? It looks like they came in and they made them out of softer stones.
I think that's just a bias of our own part. I think this is something, for some reason, a lot of people that think archaeologists are wrong claim that older stuff is more perfect than later stuff, and that's just not true. I mean, it's just not. This idea, I don't know why it pervades in public culture that's the case. Like they talk about, for example, the Great Pyramid being better than later pyramids. And it's like, but wait a second, we also have pyramids that are earlier than the Great Pyramid that show the progression up there, right? Or one of my examples that I like to give, a good example is Graham Hancock's one. He talks about Göbekli Tepe, where you have the ceremonial core with the stone circles with the megalithic stones and the beautiful sculpture. And then you have outside of it, you have less perfect stuff. Right? These houses on my last video on my YouTube, will be second to last when you see this, is about Göbekli Tepe with the director of excavations, and we talk about what those less perfect structures are. Let's say less perfect, and what that is think about it like this, Danny. You ever been to Washington D.C.?
Yeah.
Is the White House really impressive?
Sure.
Is the Capitol building really impressive?
Yeah.
Yeah. How about just the houses?
That big.
How about just the
statue of Lincoln?
houses in downtown? Are they as impressive as the White House and the Capitol building?
No.
Okay. And yet they're built more recently. Is our technology now worse than the technology of the people that built the 19th century White House?
The function's different. Yeah.
Yeah. It's meant to be presented as phenomenal. And so that's what the issue is at Göbekli Tepe. You have the ceremonial core where people are going for their ceremonies, they're politicking, they're doing religious stuff, they're doing whatever.
Right.
And then you have the houses where people are living. And guess what? The houses are shittier than the fucking ceremonial core.
Right.
Right? That's just function.
Sure.
It's
That
what
makes
you're
sense.
doing. And so that's oftentimes a lot of these kind of things. The Egyptian tombs changed in style as time went on because of grave robbers, because of the amount of wealth that the state had. It doesn't mean they have less technology. It means that they're doing something different.
Are you familiar with Chris Dunn's pyramid power plant theory?
I have not read the book at all. I've seen some YouTube videos, so I'm probably not going to address it very well. But I can address to you the modern consensus on the pyramids.
No, I know I know the consensus is that they're tombs, right?
Yeah, I can explain why though.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so why are they tombs? Let's think this through. What do you find in tombs?
Dead people.
Yeah, what have we found in pyramids?
Dead people.
We've found pieces of dead people in most pyramids.
Yes.
Yeah. Why have we not found many? Because we have found some. It's really common on the internet where people say, there's no mummies in the pyramids. Bullshit. There are a few that have complete mummies, but there's others where they have pieces of mummies.
Is it possible that a civilization came to these pyramids, and these pyramids existed before they were there, right? And they saw these things. Maybe they weren't a part of them, but they thought they were these grandiose structures that were unexplainable to them. They looked like they were built by gods. And they thought, this makes sense. This is the perfect place to bury our dead people. The most important people, the pharaohs, the kings. We're going to make these the places we bury them.
Okay.
Does that make any sense at all to you?
Not if you know the evidence. So, okay, let's think about it this way then. So, what's happening before the Great Pyramids are built, right? So we have two major cemeteries. I've worked at one of them, Abydos. There's another one called Hierakonpolis. And these are the two sort of pre-pyramid cemeteries where extremely wealthy royal people were being buried. right? And it's in these cemeteries that we can see the developments that lead to the pyramids, if you see what I mean, in a step-by-step way. And these cemeteries, by the way, are radiocarbon dated, as are the pyramids. We can get to that in a second. And so you have it. You have two different ways of the tombs at that point. One of them at Abydos is the idea of a large fucking tomb. Right? And what they did there, and this is like the first dynasty in Egypt, they built these giant mud brick enclosures. I mean, far bigger than this room. I've excavated in one of them. It's the last one. The last one is still standing. We could Google it. It's called the Shuna. It's the tomb for Qasim Kemwe, who is the last pharaoh of either the first or second dynasty. I'm not an Egyptologist. I should know since I've worked there, though. But the thing is each ruler always tore down the previous enclosure for his previous ruler, and then built their new one. And they keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So you see this trend towards monumentalization, not in a pyramid form though. It's not even a roofed. It's just a rectangular enclosure, but enormous. The walls are way up there. And it's huge, right?
Okay.
And the last one especially. But the other ones are really big too, that have been excavated by plenty of really cool people like Matt Adams and David O'Connor and people I've worked with, Laurel Beastock. And the other cemetery, and this is where, so you have monumentality developing over here. So that's key ingredient number one for pyramids. They're big, right? The second key ingredient is, what are pyramids made from? How do they actually physically come to be? And we can see that in the very first pyramid ever built. And so at this other cemetery, here on Compalis, all the royal people are built in these rectangular sort of structures. They're rectangular still, but they are covered. It's a room. It's like a mausoleum. We could think of it like this. It's probably about the size of this room. Little smaller sometimes, right? Okay. So that's where they're all buried with their sort of grave goods and animals and whatever, that kind of shit. And then when you get the very first pyramid, the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, you can actually see this. If we get the right photo, we could try to find it. I should have gotten one.
You can find it.
But you need the right photo is the point.
Okay.
There's plenty of drawings of it, but if you want to trust it by seeing it with your own eyes, it's good, right? And you can see it, but we need the right photo. I don't have one because I've never been there. But what they do when they build this step pyramid is they first build this mastaba, this rectangular thing the size of the room. Then they decide, you know what? Let's build another mastaba on top of it. And then another one, and another one. And so they expand the mastaba in different directions until it ends up as a pyramid. And you can see that in the phasing of the walls, right? You can see it really clearly. Here it is. The drawing on the right is the key one, where you see that red part at the bottom. No, not that one.
Oh.
The one to the left of that.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So the original tomb is just that rectangle at the bottom with a chamber below.
Okay.
And then they choose to expand it, and then they choose to build another mastaba. Then they end up with a smaller step pyramid, and then they turn it into a bigger step pyramid. And in that one pyramid, you see the development, the invention of a pyramid, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
It's invented right there from the mastaba. And we have those mastabas even earlier, right? And so then after that, they start getting even fancier. They build different kinds of step pyramids. Then eventually they put them with smooth sides, and then boom, the pyramid is born as you have it. And so we see this step-by-step progression. I have a video. I've interviewed Dr. Beth Hart on this. She's an expert on this stuff. And so it's called From Hierakonpolis to Giza. And it's not done yet. It's coming out soon. The interview's done. But so that's the development that we see. So we can see that in construction. And all well dated from context.
What are all these shafts doing?
The burial shafts, yeah.
How big are those shafts?
I don't know. I've never been down there, but they'd be big enough to walk in a lot of them.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the purpose of those shafts is to walk.
I've been in the biggest pyramids, and they're small, the shafts, into even the Great Pyramid. But yeah, it's very walkable. Yeah. Well, the purpose was probably to bury the pharaoh down there, right? And so having it underground gives it extra protection and stuff like that. So the second reason why you want to talk about the Great Pyramid of Giza?
Sure.
Yeah, the Great Pyramid of Giza has the key thing there is that it actually has wood in it, and within the stones, right? And then plaster.
From what I understand, from what I've heard, is there's only been wood found in other pyramids.
The bent pyramid?
The bent pyramid had wood in it that was radiocarbon dated to much later.
Much later than what?
Later than when they think, well, basically what they're carbon dating the wood at is what they're saying when the pyramid was built, right?
Yeah.
But the wood could have been added later, right?
Not if it's like fixed within the stones. So this is why Graham Hancock even accepts the dates of the Great Pyramid.
Like so it is absolutely, it's a fact that it would not be possible that wood could have been added after.
You'd have to basically deconstruct and reconstruct a big part of it.
Do we have any photos of this?
I don't know. There's a big article on it, but I haven't read it in a while. I read it.
We pulled it up on previous podcasts, I believe.
But I mean,
the bent pyramid wood, the cedar. This is
where you want to get someone like Zahi Hawass or Mark Lehner, because this is their stuff, right? But they took, and they have a map of it at least. I imagine they must have archival photos as well. But they took samples from the Great Pyramid of Giza and the other pyramids at Giza. Yeah, see, I'm not talking about wooden beams though. Okay. I'm talking about plant material that's in the plaster. Right, that's part of, and in between the joins, the joins of the stuff, and they took the plant material and radiocarbon dated it, and it dates to the Old Kingdom of Egypt.
Right, and so the arguments that are made about this is that the plaster and the wood came later to try to repair it and restore it, and make it look better.
But again, it's multiple lines of evidence here. And I want to be clear.
But what is that? Like, if the plaster's there and it's radiocarbon dated
But I guess my point is, if you want to make that argument, that's also the argument that I'm making is built up also by that development from mastaba to pyramid. Right? So we have multiple lines of evidence that tell us the pyramids date to the same period. We have more than that, by the way. For example, when do we have our first evidence of people on Giza? During Old Kingdom Egypt, right around there. We have plentiful tombs. It pops up as a cemetery right at that time. And so, the reality is all the artifacts date to that time, all the radiocarbon dates to that time, and we can see at a variety of sites this development that gets to that point. And so with those three independent lines of evidence, it seems pretty secure that the pyramid was built at that time. If you see what I mean. Sure. And to argue otherwise, I'm not saying that it's not impossible, but it's really fucking unlikely. You have a lot of evidence, a lot of data points of artifacts and radiocarbon dates and different sites that show this change in tomb construction that are all securely dated. And so, and then you even have the texts that come later. Yes, admittedly, the texts from ancient Egypt are dating later than the construction of it, but they describe a consistent story as well. So you even have the historical sources from the Egyptians of what their ancestors did that says that what they're doing matches our archaeological evidence. And so, that's multiple lines of evidence built by so many different experts from so many different excavations. That's why I'm really damn sure, 99.9% sure, the pyramids were built by the Egyptians during Old Kingdom Egypt. And I can't see how anything that, I've never heard anything at least, that would make me even remotely consider otherwise.
Not even like all the shafts and the chambers that are in there, and those 500-ton granite blocks that are inside these chambers that are cut perfectly and placed perfectly, and how would you get the giant granite box up that tiny little shaft? What was the purpose of the tiny little shaft?
Probably to make it tough to access.
There it is. Yeah, pull up that.
Yeah, they don't want it to be robbed. These were all, and so here's another thing, Danny. So we talk about, well, like, our mummies there, and like, well, they were probably robbed, right? And the reality is the Egyptians tell us about the struggles they have with tomb robbing. And so so at the end of the old period, you have the intermediate period. During these at the end of the Old Kingdom, during various intermediate periods when the state's power breaks down, we have papyri that talk about tomb robbing. And in fact, the Egyptians, what they need to do is they need to collect the pharaoh's bodies and protect them. So they take them out of their original tomb. We have this one tomb, I forget.
And I'm sure they kept treasure in there too.
Yeah. Right. That's why they're robbing. Yeah.
Sure.
And so, we have textual descriptions of the Egyptians moving their pharaohs to protect them from being desecrated from generations ago, right? And then we have these caches of pharaohs. They end up all in one tomb, because they're hidden there so that they couldn't be found because their other tombs were found. And so, we have again, that's part of the independent evidence that even though we don't find a complete mummy in here, that's got to be a pyramid, a tomb. We have the sarcophagus, we have grave goods. We're missing the mummy, but they moved these mummies because they had to move them to protect them. And they tell us they do this. And they tell us about punishing tomb robbers by killing them. All this stuff is written down. It's actually in the beginning of Eric Klein's book. I found out about this.
No, I don't doubt that these were used as tombs.
Yeah.
But I think that this was built for a different reason. initially. I think that if you look at the shafts that go in, the way the chambers are constructed, the subterranean chamber, all these shafts that are clearly meant, I mean, I've never been in there, but I've talked to a lot of people who have, and everyone I've talked to that's been inside these pyramids say that it does not feel like something that was made for people to move through.
You've talked to me now. I've been in them.
Right.
I've been in that pyramid, and I'm telling you, I think it was built.
You think it was built for people to move through?
I think it was built for people to get the grave goods and the pharaoh in there.
And what do you think the
seal it.
reason is for the shafts that go out on the top, out of the king's chambers, that go exit
Some of
the
those
pyramid?
air shafts, I think, actually are really well lined up with astronomical stuff. And so there's actually some good articles on that. So they're intentionally lining that up with we call it archaeoastronomy. Sorry, that's the archaeology of astronomy. But it does seem to match because, look, the Egyptians did want to orient things very precisely. That's actually another argument that they are built by the Egyptians because they are oriented like others of their structures. The due north. Right? And to get due north isn't too hard in a desert. On the equinox, you hold up a stick, you see its shadow, and you draw the line from dawn to dusk, and you have a direct east-west line that you can then make a north-south line on. And of course, it's a square, so when we say north-south, it's actually a line perfectly east-west.
Yeah.
Right? So, because it's a square. And I mean, again, the other reason, like I said, that it was designed as a tomb is because you can see the development of tombs, and it matches, because you go from mastaba to step pyramid to, true pyramid, like this, smooth pyramid. And so seeing that step by step progression over 1,000, I don't know if it's 1,000 years, but over hundreds of years, that's really compelling evidence in my mind, And let alone the Egyptians telling us these were tombs and have always been tombs, I look, and don't get me wrong, I am the first one to say, hey, when you go in there, it's a creepy, otherworldly feeling. I am not denying that, at all. It is creepy and otherworldly, and I can see why people would be enamored by it and interested in it and come up with different explanations because they're describing what they feel, if you see what I mean.
Right.
And so I can totally get that. But to me, the independent lines of evidence are damn convincing. It's been argued about for a while. And the radiocarbon dates are fairly new in the last 20 years, 30 years. But the rest of it has been known for a while. And they've been putting together this picture very slowly. Graham Hancock, in several different appearances, has argued that his lost civilization had 18th or 19th century technology.
Yes.
And I did not know what that meant, of course, because he's not always clear on what that technology means, right? And so I said, I put up a quote that he gave when he was on London Real, I think, with Brian Rose in 2017 or 18. And he mentioned that they have 18th or 19th century technology. And I sort of said, look, the last time you had a debate, it was with this guy who was a skeptic, not an archaeologist, Michael Shermer. And the start of it was, hey, Graham, what kind of technology are you talking about? Are you talking about metals? Are you talking about writing? And Graham says, well, perhaps the technology for metals was chosen not to be used. Right? So meaning, no, I don't think they had metals. So I acknowledge that, and I said, that's good. If you don't think there's metals, because if you go and you look at ice core evidence, we can trace large-scale regional metallurgy activity in ice cores. It's been done for Roman period, it's been done for medieval period, it's been done in different areas of the world. We can look at different glaciers and test for that. And I showed an example of that from a colleague of mine at Oxford, Andrew Wilson, who's a Roman archaeologist. I don't know him personally, but he's a great guy. I know people that work with him and stuff like that. And so I used that as an example of how we detect this. And I said, well, this has not been detected in Ice Age layers of ice cores. And people are saying, but you didn't show the Ice Age on that graph, right? That's what you just said. Well, dude, of course not. I was using a published graph. This is the graph that was in that article. What do you mean as an example of what we do?
Is there another graph that shows the Ice Age? Are there ice cores?
There's not another graph that I know of, but there are other graphs, and we can talk about it. Can we pull up my screen?
Boom.
All right. So I don't know. It was a few weeks, I think, after I was on Rogan. Chris Dunn went on Rogan.
Yeah.
And he said that Flint's wrong about this. He was the first person to say I'm wrong about this because of this article. This article from what? 1996. And he says, now look, in this Greenland ice core, there are changes in metals in there, right? And I don't have access to the full thing right this second. I have it somewhere. But I just want to point out that, like, yeah, there are changes to metals in there, but they are all natural lead, copper, zinc, and cadmium concentrations in central Greenland ice. So how do you distinguish these metals from metallurgy metals, right? And this article actually does this. The reason why is the graphs that it shows here. Wait a second. Let me just pull up the damn paper. I should have access to it since I think I am logged in.
There we go. Oh.
No, it's just being weird.
There we go. Oh, shit. It's flashing like
No,
crazy.
I know. There we go.
There we go.
Here's the actual paper. We can scroll through it. So
what
there's some
is this
graphs.
paper explaining?
It's saying that that during the Ice Age, there's variations in copper, lead, etc., different metals in these ice cores, right? And it shows the graphs that go back to the Ice Age. These graphs go back to the Ice Age. This is goes back 160,000 years.
Okay, wow.
Okay, so we're talking into the Ice Age. Man, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Fuck.
We're back.
Stop. All right, I need a new computer. I knew I needed a computer. I gotta wait till January 1st. So the reality is, though, that yes, this stuff varies, but we know it's not related to metallurgy for like 3 different reasons. Some of them's in later papers that I'll show you. But one of the main reasons is these changes in metals, they actually don't relate anything to do with human civilization. In fact, during the end of the Ice Age, when Graham claims there's a lost civilization, there's not a spike in metals in these ice cores, right? It's during other periods, and specifically, it even says it in the title, changes in natural lead, copper, zinc, and cadmium concentrations in the ice cores, and their association with climatic changes and resultant variations of dominant source contributions. So in a sense, when the planet gets drier, there's more desert, which means there's more dust that gets kicked up into the atmosphere, and then it deposits these different metals in ice cores. This is 100% different than the paper that I showed about Roman period metallurgy, where it's not all these different things, zinc, cadmium, copper, lead, it's just lead associated with silver mining, because lead is there with silver.
Okay.
Right? And it matches up with a cultural change, not a climatic change.
And who presented this paper? Where did this come from? It is
Chris Dunn was the one who presented this
Chris
originally.
Dunn presented this as an
And
argument.
then other people on Twitter and elsewhere and YouTube have presented it as well against me. And to me, I'm sort of like...
So it's lead, natural... This one just says natural lead, copper, zinc, and cadmium. So how do we, like...
And their association with climatic changes. I want to be clear that the title of the article supports what I was saying and not what these people are saying.
Okay.
Just really, really clear. Just read the title.
And I know you just said this, but how again do we decipher the difference between from natural lead and silver mining?
There's several different ways.
Okay.
So in this paper, they're fairly sure that it's due to climate change because these changes correlate with changes in the climate. So when the climate's getting drier, you see changes in these metals showing up.
Okay.
And the explanation for that is when it's drier, there's more deserts, so there's more wind-blown dust, which deposits a variety of different minerals in the ice cores. The second argument is when you mine silver, the metal that occurs with it is lead. So what shows up when they're mining is lead, not zinc and cadmium and shit like that.
Okay.
It's not just random stuff. It correlates with what we expect from climate, and the other one correlates with what we expect from what people are doing. Right. And the other one, by the way, the Roman and medieval one, it does not correlate with a change in climate. It just correlates with the adoption of metallurgy at a large scale. So it's this independent sources of evidence. The other argument where people say I'm lying is because the article I used also went one step further and used one last test to demonstrate it, where you get this lead at that. Let's get that article up. This is the article that I showed on Rogan. Okay. Lead pollution recorded in Greenland ice indicates European emissions tracked plagues, wars, imperial expansion, yada, yada, yada. So they did a series of things. Not only did they produce this graph, and this graph is really cool, it lines up, but then what they did is they went a step further. They said, you know what we can do? We know where the Romans mined silver. We can actually do an isotopic analysis of these traces of lead in the ice cores and see if they fingerprint on known mines and known silver sources. And lo and behold, they did, right? So this one's really clear. This lead came from those mines over there.
Wow.
If you see what I mean. Super fucking cool.
Where were the ice cores taken from?
These ones, were they all
Greenland,
Greenlands?
you said?
I think these are also Greenlands, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
And
Greenland.
so that's this fingerprinting in a sense, which, like I said, we do this with the stones at Giza. I do it with animals. They're doing it here with leaded ice cores. It's a really common method for archaeology and geology, climatology, etc. And so this was the other argument. Well, they never tested these natural ones in the same way isotopically. They never tested them for metallurgy. A, you don't test it for metallurgy. What you're testing for is the source of these materials. B, there's a big difference because, and we'll get to even more in a second. Here, it's just lead pollution because that's associated with silver. Here, it's a range of different metals that are what you'd expect when you have wind-blown dust of minerals. It's a range of stuff.
Right.
But guess what? Now that I've been accused of this stuff, I've done even more research into this because it's important to check yourself. And it turns out that they have isotopically tested ice age ice layers from ice cores, including lead, isotopic composition in southern hemisphere. And here, we're talking back to 220,000 years ago, right? We're talking lead isotopic composition. So doing that fingerprinting to see where they come from. And guess what? They come from a suite of soil and low-S samples in the southern hemisphere to figure out where they come from. They all come from, I think, South America in this one, and from this dust that gets kicked up. No, wait. I have a few different articles is the problem.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Dust.
This is, you can just search through these. Dust, man. This is, and so there's dozens of articles. If you start searching for ice cores, dust, and metals, different metal types, so many articles. This is a well-known phenomenon of studying this kind of stuff. And there's like services here. These guys do services. We will do your isotope analysis from dust cores, ice cores. And they even say right here, the source of dust within ice cores provenancing can be predicted by analyzing the isotopic composition of various elements, including strontium, which is a method I use in animal teeth, and neodymium, which I don't use, which can be matched to geological mineralogy of potential dust sources. This is what's going on here. And so to argue I lied is just like, A, that's just insulting and ridiculous.
Yeah.
I didn't create the graph. I used a published source as an example. That's just malicious to assume that like that. B, go do your damn homework. Read the damn title of the paper.
Yeah.
Read the damn, this is the paper they all have used.
Right.
And it's like right in the title. So, sorry guys, I didn't lie.
According to a lot of people in academia and a lot of scholars, apparently it's consensus that Plato did lie a lot about Socrates.
Yeah, we can talk about that. And I think, so all right, the term lie is a loaded term, right? But when it comes to Plato, and particularly the Atlantis story, it's a perfect example of what we call a noble lie, right? And so this is actually, I have a YouTube video coming out in about a month on this. It's the reason I joined YouTube was to make this video because I'm writing a book on Atlantis, right? And so so my goal here is everybody's interested in Atlantis right now. It's all over YouTube. It's all over the internet. It's all over what people are talking about. And so let's take an actual scholarly perspective on it. And like Amin, I have experience reading ancient Greek. I've not read nearly as much as him because I focus on archaeology. But at the same time, I also have done a lot of archaeology. So I excavated in Athens, Greece, right? So right where Plato grew up and you know taught, I study material from there, and I work with an excavation team there. I'm one of the, one of many, but one of the world experts on ancient Athens. And so I realized it was a few years ago, actually, this is how I got started on this topic. I was on social media, and there was a new TV show on the Discovery Channel coming out about Atlantis. And the host thought that he'd done some research, and he wrote this paper that he was hoping to get published, and that's what the show was based on. And so he's like, no, this is really scholarly. Let's have scholars look at this. So I told him, I said this publicly on Twitter. I said, if you want to send it to me, I will do a public peer review of your paper. But warning, I'm going to be honest and critical, right? That's what you do as a scholar to other scholars. And so he sent it along, and it was actually in many ways, just like Graham's books, a well-researched paper in the sense that he'd done a lot of reading, cited a lot of stuff, but sometimes people who don't have the training and the experience, they miss the forest for the trees. And so that's where some of these issues come in. And I realized that because I focus on Athens, that actually I had the smoking gun on how to demonstrate to people why Atlantis doesn't exist. So let's think about this.
Okay.
And I want to say first off that maybe I found Atlantis in a certain way, if you think about it like that. And we can actually sit there and fact check it. How would you yourself go about taking a text with descriptions of places and look for Atlantis and fact check it? And so just so you get the context of that text, it's a conversation between friends with Socrates and Critias and Timaeus. And they're sitting there and they're talking about, it's set up like this, where Plato's Republic? You ever heard of that?
Yep.
In Plato's Republic, Socrates has a conversation with other people, and they build this ideal city, the perfect constitution for how people can live in kind of peace and harmony.
Right.
And then like a few days later, it's a group of people that they're saying, now, Socrates, he starts off, he says, now I want to see how that ideal city acts in a certain situation, in war. How is this city going to act in war? And so one of my colleagues, he's where is he? University of Vermont, Mark Usher. He's published on Plato's Republic, and he sort of thinks of it as Sim City. You ever play Sim City?
Yep.
You sort of build this city block by block by block. That's what they do in the Republic. Now, for the Atlantis story, Socrates is saying, let's play the game of civilization.
Right.
We're going to create this civilization over here. It looks like that. This is the ideal city, and what we're going to do is we're going to make this early version of Athens from 9,000 years ago. That's going to be our ideal city. And then we need an opponent for it to fight against. That's going to be Atlantis. And so we're going to create this Atlantis sort of thing with this island and concentric rings, and we're going to build it up block by block by block. And then we're going to see what happens if they fight. And that's what the story is, right? That's the whole war between Athens and Atlantis. And that's what the entire thing is about. That's, if you go and read the Plato from cover to cover, that's what it is. And so how would you actually fact check this as a true or false story?
Well, going back to Atlanta, like what his evidence was for the story of Atlantis, it was that allegedly Solon,
Well,
right?
We can talk about that too.
Solon.
But let's not go there yet.
Okay.
Let's not go there yet. Well, that's a different topic, and I have stuff ready on that as well.
Okay.
But let's first think, how would you actually go and fact check a war between Athens and Atlantis?
You would have to go look for evidence of dead people.
Maybe. Where would you look, though? Where would you first look?
You would look somewhere between Atlantis and wherever the description of Atlantis apparently was, and where Athens is, right?
But what do we know? What can we start with? If you want to fact check something and ground truth it, archaeologists work from the known to the unknown, right?
Okay.
So if we're saying there's a war between Athens and Atlantis, what do we want to look for? We want to first look at Athens. Does Plato's description of Athens actually match up with what we know of Athens? Because we've done a lot of work in Athens. People have been excavating there for 200 years. We have dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands, I'm not sure, I have to count, but we have hundreds of historical sources for Athens, and thousands if we include inscriptions, we include art, we include all this kind of stuff of Athens, and we have millions and millions of pottery fragments and sculptural fragments, houses that stretch back 5,000 years. Guess what they don't do? They don't stretch back 9,000 years, though. Nobody lived in Athens 9,000 years ago. So, for him to say there was a city there 9,000 years ago, no way. There wasn't anybody there. There's literally nothing there. And you say, oh, well, maybe archaeologists haven't dug enough. Well, you do realize that the Athenian Acropolis, here, let me pull up my screen if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. This is the Athenian Acropolis. This is what everybody thinks of when you think about Athens, right?
Yes.
And so you pull it up. This has been excavated to bedrock. You can't dig down any further. It's been fully excavated. And if you sort of look off down to the left, this is where I'm looking the right way. Down to the left is the Athenian Agora. It's right sort of here. This is where the Americans excavate.
Yeah.
Further off this way, the Germans excavate. The Greeks excavate every single time there's construction going on. Everywhere around Athens, there's been hundreds of different archaeological excavations, and we're always trying to go down until there's no more human material there, until bedrock, if you see what I mean.
Okay.
And there might be practical reasons we can't. It's dangerous to go too low or something like that. But when we can, and that's a lot of times, we dig down as far as we can until there is no human material left. And then we keep digging to test that there's nothing underneath that, right? And so we can actually check Plato does he get stuff right about Athens? And the answer is no, he does not. Not only is the chronology of it wrong, so there's nobody here 9,000 years ago.
So this is when he's writing about it in Republic, you're saying?
No, he's writing about it in the Atlantis story, in the Timaeus Critias.
In the Timaeus Critias?
Yeah.
So he's writing about a hypothetical war between Atlantis and
Athens.
And
he spends about half of the Critias describing this early Athens, and then the next half of the Critias describing an early Atlantis.
Okay.
And everybody goes and takes the descriptions of Atlantis, round, circular island and stuff like that, and they're like, oh, there's something round over here. That might be Atlantis. But dude, there's a bazillion round things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you can't be confirmed one thing is Atlantis or not.
So what you're saying is that when he's talking about a war between Atlantis and Athens, this is involved in his sort of noble lie to create a society?
Yes, it's involved. No, I wouldn't call that a noble lie. It's involved in his way of demonstrating the right way of creating a government. And so Athens in this story is the ideal city. It has all the virtues, all the goodness of what they described in the Republic, while Atlantis is actually the bad guys. It's kind of, it's funny because today we have this conception that Atlantis was hyper civilized, advanced, and stuff like that. That's not according to Plato. According to Plato, this is a dystopia. It's a bad place to be. And so, it had too much wealth. It was corrupted. And that's why it fell.
So was the idea that he wanted to paint some sort of an enemy?
Yeah,
like an enemy that only they knew didn't exist, but maybe that the population thought was real to keep everyone.
Not that the population thought it was real. The idea was to create a story that would show how his ideal city works, a clear fiction.
Okay,
and we'll get into the dissemination of it, the story, how it got passed on, and how that shows that it's a fiction.
Right.
But from a modern perspective, we can actually ground truth or fact check Plato by checking what he gets wrong about Athens or right, and he gets it all wrong. What he describes. So, for example, I have this arrow here on the screen, right?
But he had all these ideas on how he wanted to shape society.
Yes.
And like re-engineer society.
And that's a philosophical question rather than a material question, right? It wasn't like we need to innovate new technology. That was like we need to understand how to educate people.
Okay.
That's what a lot of it was around. We want the philosophers to rule rather than the warriors, for example. We live in a society today where the philosophers don't rule, and that's part of the problem. So he had this idea in the Republic of the philosopher kings. That's who's supposed to rule to create a just society that educates people and sort of
and the knights were below them.
And he was very into censorship. They have a long discussion in the Republic.
He wanted to get rid of Homer.
But yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. That's in the section on the noble lie. He wanted to get rid of a lot of different myths because he thought that, like, even if those myths are true, they teach bad morals. So we should instead only have myths that teach people how to behave correctly. That was like, I compare this to Santa Claus. It's sort of like, you have your kids, you're raising your children around Christmas time, and you sort of say, you got to be good so you get presents from Santa Claus, right? And that's how Plato saw education. Right? That was his way of seeing education, was to teach good behavior through the stories that you tell. And so, so like here you can see, if you just want to like look at this materially, you see how there's the Athenian Acropolis right here.
Yep.
But then to the left, there's another big hill. That's called Lykavitos. I used to live right near. There's a church on it. It's a beautiful place. But in the story of Atlantis, when he's describing Athens, he describes geologically that these two hills, which are miles and miles away from each other, were actually connected and part of the same thing. And geologically, we know that's not true. They were never connected, and there was no rainwater that eroded them away. So we just know, based off of natural sciences, that his description of this early Athens doesn't match up with what we can tell.
Could he have meant connected in a different way?
No, because he describes very clearly a rainstorm that strips the sediment and causes it to flood away. That's actually what he describes. Okay. It's one of his floods, let's say. Okay. Yeah, and so we know that flood just didn't happen here. It was just simply know it. Another one, let's check this out. He describes that these warriors in this early Republic version of Atlantis, they had this temple of Athena right here, right? And it's really cool. Do you see the outline of that temple there? There's like small walls that are not a major building there, right where the arrow is pointing in the middle of. That's called the Old Temple to Athena. And it's the most important building on the Athenian Acropolis, despite the fact that it's ruined. And so what it was ruined by the Persians when they invaded in 480 BC. BC. And we know really well from dozens of historical sources and the archaeological evidence from the excavations that happened in the early 20th, late 19th century. They're called the Dorpfeld Foundations today after Wilhelm Dorpfeld, the archaeologist that described them. And so we actually know when it dates to. And guess what? It was built around the time Solon was around. So, It was not built, 9,000 years earlier. In fact, it was built right when Solon lived. The late 7th century, early 6th century.
Right.
We have I should have put some in here. We have the sculptures from it, right? And in fact, you can still see the paint on the sculptures. We can Google it and look it up if you want.
Okay.
Because they're really friggin' cool. People don't really realize that paint is on, all these marble things were painted. This is what's called the Bluebeard sculpture. This is the sculpture. It's named after the blue beards these guys have. And so my point is that all this marble that we see from the ancient world is mostly painted. And the only time we see it, in this case, the temple was knocked down by the Persians and it was buried rapidly. So therefore it was protected by being buried.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why the paint is still on it. And if you go to Athens today, it's in the Acropolis Museum. They have a whole section on painted sculpture and all this painted sculpture they found. So you can see the past like how you should see it.
Right.
We see it as this bare white marble. No, it was actually really colorful. Really, really colorful. This is faded, of course, but if you were to reconstruct it, it would almost look like Vegas.
Wow.
Like when we look at this picture, we see this bare white marble. No, it would all be very colorfully painted like Vegas, like very garish. And so, when Plato's describing this temple, dude, this is the most famous structure. So the Athenians very consciously, because it was their most sacred temple to Athena, and they're named after Athena, and the Acropolis is Athena's rock, after the Persians destroyed the city, they specifically did not build anything over the foundations of this temple. They left it visible as a reminder of that destruction by the Persians. And so it was always visible through antiquity. It's something everybody knew really well. It was part of your education as an Athenian, what this temple was. Mm-hmm. And what it signified, what it meant in terms of the city, the foundation of the city as the city of Athens, and the destruction by the Persians, which also then shows how Athens ended up beating the Persians, which led to its glory days, right? So that's like a major component of Athenian history. So if Plato is getting that wrong, his audience, who are Athenians, are going to know that immediately. They're going to be like, no, the Archeos Neos, the old temple, that's right there. I know all about it. Yeah. So everybody who read that story and who was an Athenian, it was the people he knew, the people he was talking to and whatnot, they would immediately know this is not a true story.
Right.
Because they know the real history of that temple, which was only a few generations before them at the time Plato lived. So, it's not that long. It's within living history, right? And so, this is really well understood. So, we can go and ground truth Athens and demonstrate that that's not right. So if we can't trust the details about Plato's Athens from the same story,
right?
Why would we trust the details about Plato's Atlantis as being anything worth checking for?
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by ground truthing or fact checking. And we do this all the time in archaeology. We're always ground truthing our evidence. In 2003, I was finishing my undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania. Right? We're talking bastion of academic archaeology. The Penn Museum has been excavating around the world for hundreds of years, right? And it's Ivy League school, that kind of thing. You're talking literally one of the epicenters in the world of academic archaeology.
Right.
And me at the time, I'm like a dude who gets stoned, right? So I'm like, you know what? I didn't even know I really wanted to be an archaeologist at that point. Even though my dad was one, I really didn't want to be one for a while because I was like, I don't want to just follow in my dad's footsteps, right? In the end, I realized, look, I actually love this stuff. So I went to it. But so I said, all right, what am I going to write my undergrad honors thesis on, right? To graduate with honors. Because I was a good student despite being a stoner. And so, and I also smoked pot because I have a chronic disease and it helps with it. And I smoked a lot of pot. And so I asked my advisor and I said, head of the department at the time, I said, look, what should I write my honors thesis on? Do you have any suggestions? He's like, you're about to go on a dig in Ukraine. Why don't you ask them if they have any projects? So I get in touch with them and they just ghost me. So, but because of the rules, I had to do an honors thesis if I wanted to graduate with honors, and I had to decide in my junior year before my senior year started so I could get going. And he's like, just pick anything you like. And I think it over, and then I go in there and I'm like sweating bullets. I'm like, could I do something on drugs in the ancient world? That would be really cool. And he's like, yeah, man, go for it. Go talk to Peter Struck. He studies like ancient religion and different stuff like that. Go talk to him. He might have some ideas. And so I talked to Peter, and he's just like, dude, that sounds like an interesting idea. People don't look at this. And so you should come and take my classes next year. Let's think about how you could study drugs in the context of ancient religion.
Okay.
Right? Because that's what he focuses on. So the next term, he teaches a course on ancient Greek magic.
Right.
Or ancient magic in general, Greco-Roman, Babylonian, etc. And I'm sitting there and we read the Greek magical papyri, and I'm just reading through that. I'm still trying to get my specific thesis topic. At the same time, this is 2003, so we don't have the same kind of library resources we have today. So I'm going and Googling around drugs in the ancient world, and I'm getting like old issues of High Times magazine where they're like, this is the argument in there, is like the Romans used hemp fiber for their ropes, so therefore they're getting stoned all the time. And me being, I hope, a smart stoner, I'm thinking to myself, that's not the best argument. Like, hemp rope is useful. Hemp fiber we know today is very useful. It's a very strong fiber to make, textiles out of. So, but that doesn't mean they're getting high off the stuff. It means they're making, rope. And so I wanted real evidence that's direct, that tells me they are using drugs 100%. Right? So as I'm taking this course, I'm reading the Greek magical papyri, which are a series of about 100 different papyri.
Yeah, explain it.
They're all found in Egypt, and they date from something like, I think the earliest are from like the 2nd or 3rd century BC, so when Egypt is ruled by the Greeks, and the latest are something like the 6th century AD, so like, sort of early medieval period, right? But most of them are from like the 3rd century AD, the height of the Roman Empire type period, right? And what's really cool is, even though you can only find papyri in Egypt because it's so dry, they preserve. We do have some papyri elsewhere, like Herculaneum, the lava flow from Vesuvius, preserved this ancient library there. It's a philosophical library, and AI just helped unpeel it and translate it. The big news like 6 months ago. So we do have some from elsewhere, but we get most of our papyri from Egypt. That's where we get fragments of like Homer that dates, from the oldest fragments of Plato and Homer and whatnot, usually come from papyri, right, in Egypt. So we have all these papyri. Some of them are used as mummy cartonnage. They're recycled on these mummies, and when they take apart the mummies in the 19th century, they see there's writing on it, and they're like, and then they read it, and at the time, in the 19th century, this stuff was like satanic. Right? Because it's like the mishmash of polytheism. It's the stuff that ends up becoming, the witch trials and stuff like that, right? Yeah. And so scholars didn't want to touch it with like a 10-foot pole back in the 19th, early 20th century. The first class ever taught on...
Did something just happen?
Yeah, I saw the light change.
A light just went out or something. That was weird.
It did change. I'm with you. But okay, so the very first class, early 20th century on this stuff, they couldn't even call it ancient magic because they were worried about the reaction. So they called it selected papyri. And that was it. And then, of course, it's a class.
They were worried about the reaction from who?
I don't know, fellow scholars or the church or something like that, because everybody's very conservative. And then over time, especially in the last 30 years, 40 years, the first translation, the major translation of them by Betts and Scarborough was the guy who did all the plants in them and stuff like that. That came out in the 90s, and since then it's been exploding. The field of ancient magic is huge because it actually changes how we understand ancient religion. And so what's really cool is we have throughout the Mediterranean world, and even as far north as Bath, England, for example, there's we have these lead curse tablets. Right? And these are, this is when you do magic. You basically inscribe a lead curse tablet, you roll it up because it's paper thin, and then you put it in a grave, or you put it in a well, or you put it underground, you bury it. If you're trying to curse your neighbor's business because they're your competitor and you don't like them, you bury it under their doorstep. If you want to curse that chariot driver because you root for the other team, you bury it on the racetrack. And we still have examples of this today. When they were doing Yankee Stadium, one of the construction workers was a Red Sox fan, or maybe it's vice versa. It's in the news. One of the construction workers was either a Yankees or Red Sox fan, the opposing team, and they actually put in the hole a jersey of the opposite team as a curse in a sense, right? Because this stuff pervades, right? And so what's really cool is we have some of these lead texts that are word for word the exact same spell on these papyri in Egypt. So we know this culture of magic and what's going on is very widespread. We don't know whether the Egyptian sources are a little biased. They have a lot of kind of Egyptian religion in them, like a larger amount than one would expect. But the whole culture of magic, it mishmashes different religions. It has kind of a little bit of Babylonian religion, a lot of Egyptian religion, Greek religion, Roman religion, Phoenician religion, different kinds of sources, Jewish religion, Christian religion, all in there, all within the same spell, because it's what's called syncretism. It's paganism. It's just a mishmash of stuff, right? They want to appease everybody they can to get the result they want, right? So I'm reading these, and guess what? A lot of these have drugs in them. Very clear drugs. Things like opium. Right? That is very clearly described. You burn opium incense, that then is supposed to summon a lover. And they even, I like this one. This is my favorite, actually. So it tells you how it works, right? Because it's this spell to get a lover. You're in love with somebody. You want to get them. So what you do, let me find it. Sorry. I would like to read it on air because it's friggin' cool.
Apparently Galen wrote about, Marcus Aurelius' physician wrote about how much opium Marcus Aurelius was taking. He said he kept having to up his dose. And he said he was getting so annoyed by it. He's like, this fucking guy, he keeps needing, we keep having to get more and more opium for him.
Okay, so here we go. So this is the spell to Sword of Dardanus. It immediately bends and attracts the soul of whomever you wish. So you basically need to be a stalker to do this. Don't fucking do this. Just go like buy whoever you love some roses or something. Do something good, okay? But what you do is you sort of inscribe some charms and stuff on these statues that you make. And then what you do is you burn... Why is my computer stuck right now? And then you burn this offering to Eros, which includes 4 drams of opium, which is a lot of opium, right? We're talking like grams and grams of opium. And then you say this incantation. I call upon you unmoved by prayer by your great name. You want to go next?
No, you keep going.
I make my students do this.
You practiced.
I read this from my YouTube video on this. And like I said, I make my students do it sometimes when I'm teaching ancient religion. First shining, night rejoicing, night engendering, witness, erakistve, arakara, all right, whatever. You got to read all that stuff, and you got to get it perfect. And you're supposed to say it, I forget how many times, but you're supposed to say it several times. And so it's really cool because the spell actually says it has an excuse if it doesn't work. So you make the burnt offering and you continuously say the spell of invocation and send him the daimon that you summon, and he will act without fail. And whenever you bend her to your will with the stone, on that night it sends dreams. For on a different night it is busy with different matters. Now think about it. You're doing this spell, you're obsessed with somebody, you're going, you're inhaling all this opium, you go to bed, you have a bunch of dreams, right? Because that's what's going to happen, right?
Right.
And whoa, that spell worked. The daimon was summoned. I had all these dreams. It didn't quite work right. I need to say Azarachtva instead of Azaracha. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so it's an explanation kind of for how it can work. And so I started reading these and I found dozens of spells that involved ingredients that would, in our mind, alter your mind state. Right? They'd get you high, let's say, right? Something like that. And so I realized actually in these texts, there's a whole bunch of evidence for actual ancient drug use that isn't hemp fibers on rope. It isn't saying, well, this is a code word that might mean drugs. This is saying, these are the drugs. This is wormwood, this is opium, this is nightshade, this is henbane, this is what they're using. And they're using it, oftentimes ingesting it in some way or another.
Right.
Not always, but sometimes. And so, and like the nightshade ones are great. They have these ones of nightshade, some of them involve wormwood as well, where they actually rub nightshade on their body. There's one where they draw the daimon, they paint it on with this ink that's infused with the juice of wormwood, and then they put some nightshade in their ear, and then they have this, the description is amazing, they have this vivid vision of this daimon that comes to them and talks to them and answers any question they want to have answered about the past, present, and future. And it's like super described. There's some there, it's like everything becomes light. You know, it's almost, anybody who's hallucinated will know that this kind of stuff sounds like what you experience, right? Light gets changed and things become trippy and stuff like that. And so you have these texts where they're describing it to you directly. We are taking a substance that alters the mind. We are having visions. And so I did a statistical analysis of it. Every single one, I mean, there's like a couple exceptions, but there's like several dozen examples of spells that involve clear mind-altering substances, and 90% of them involve some sort of altered state of mind that's very clearly altered state of mind, usually a vision. And so it's like, this is evidence of ancient drug use.
Yeah.
And I wrote my honors thesis. My committee fucking loved it. They were like, this is, and so I guess my point is it's not a thing as a field. Sometimes it's just individuals that are assholes. And I was scared of this. I was like, I now apply to grad school, a different group of people. And I'm like, fuck, what are they going to think of this? But this is my writing sample. I have to use something for a writing sample. It's going to come from what I know best, that I'm, at that point, that was my expertise. And so I'm like, man, everybody's going to reject me. I didn't. I got into grad school. And, you know, my very first conference paper was about this. And everybody in the audience loved it. They were like, that's really interesting.
Right.
And so, I mean, there are some people that were probably like, nah, fuck this. And I talk about this even on my YouTube video and in my conference paper, how especially early scholars, up until the late 20th century, maybe middle 20th century, with the hippie movement coming in, they really did sneer at this stuff. And you could see it in their texts. I criticized this guy, E.R. Dodds, who was one of the preeminent scholars of ancient Greek religion. And he has this, he describes this vision that this guy, Aelius Aristides, saw, where he sees the god coming to him, and he describes how the emotions he feels, he's full of joy. It describes exactly what you'd think of somebody who's high, right? You know, they're seeing stuff, their state of mind has changed. And then he's like, I loved it so much that the next day I drank even more and I saw God again.
Yeah.
And then and so it's like, bam. And then E.R. Dodds, in his book, he cuts out the segment of that passage from Aelius Aristides, The Sacred Tales, that says that what he's drinking is wormwood, a wormwood concoction. The same thing in absinthe. And then he's like, no, drugs couldn't have been the result. And so, like, don't get me wrong, there are biases, but to think it's everybody, my experience is not that. My experience is that there are plenty of people who are open-minded about this, and I think especially in the last 10, 15 years, the younger generation is now much more open-minded towards that kind of thing. It's like, nobody cares.